Hello, this is Psychology B. Uh, I am a first year Doctor of Psychology student with a BS in Psych. And we'll try and keep that short from now on because credentials matter, but not so much. Today, we'll be talking about pedosexuality. I understand that I'm about 10 months too late on this drama, but I have been hearing it brought up by reactionaries about, what makes, as far as psychological distinction, what makes a uh, gay or trans person different than a pedophile that's trying to legitimize themselves by getting into the conversation and getting validated as a natural part of the sexuality spectrum. Well, there's a lot going on there. None of it is intelligent. All of it is stupid. So the main thing we can get on, I'm going to try and get on a good clip here so that we can go under 10 minutes. The issue is that people are not things to begin with. So when you look at sort of the DSM psychological spectrum of paraphilia and pathological disorders, a lot of them come down to prescribing a lot of unhealthy behavior and identities to things that aren't people. So you can't say that people are things. So what's this have to do with um, sort of the age-related pedosexual thing? I guess that's how they're describing themselves. And how is that described to same-sex relationships and sort of transitional gender identities? One of the things is that transitional gender identity has nothing to do with any of this. That has nothing to do with sexuality at all. It has to do with gender identity, which is a completely different topic in psychology, sociology, any sort of theory involved with identity. And if you don't believe in identity theory, then I'm not exactly sure what legal basis you can exclude people from identifying with. Basically, if you're not engaged in the topic, you don't get to prescribe anything to it. So what does this have to do with pedophiles? Well, now we're getting into sexuality. So if we take transgender identity out of it, which has nothing to do with, you know, sexual status, be they asexual or bisexual or pansexual or anything like that. If we just take a pedosexuality as an interest in younger people and having that being described as a sexual identity, I think we can see some initial problems with that, with the fact that the identifier there, while it may have to do with a demographic or a characteristic as far as something someone's interested in, that that's more denoting an interest in a legal status that's non-consensual, and anything resembling that is pretty much illegal no matter what you do, and that includes uh, any sort of conflation you could possibly do with any sort of kink behavior. And at that point, we wouldn't be talking about paraphilia. because you know, it's definitely my prescription, and I could definitely write a paper about it. I could write 7 papers about it. I might write a dissertation about it. I'm probably not. I'm going to write mine about the way that IQ marginalizes pretty much everyone. But if we look at sort of kink as an existence, there's pretty much no such thing as conflating consensual and non-consensual behavior as if it was just under the umbrella of kink as in, I don't know, just non-typical sexual behavior. Because literally, I can find news studies on this. I believe 51% of people enact kink in their normal sexual spectrum of behavior, as described by, I have no idea how far back that goes. That's some Kinsey shit that goes back forever. People that describe fantasies and or display some kink behavior, but not maybe regularly, it's 96%. That's going to sound like I'm making a number up. That's because I'm not trying to say 100%. I do believe it's in the mid to high 90s as far as what people are interested in, and that includes, you know, I'm not talking 50 Shades here, but it's a lot of different kind of play styles. So things that would be like, to get back on point, what is the difference between pedosexuality and any other sort of extreme kink like blood play or water sports and stuff like that? Well, the difference is that pedosexuality is not a kink, it's abuse. There's no way to actually engage in sexual behavior that involves a minor that doesn't exploit them, and that doesn't matter if you do it. It matters if other people do it too, and you're just an observer. Blame capitalism if you're a pedosexual person, and the only way to do it is there's no way for someone under the age of consent to freely project themselves in a way that would fulfill your whatever. Now, as far as anime and drawings and stuff like that, I'm not gonna walk down that rabbit hole really fast because I do believe that when we get into, should the state be able to censor what you draw and your depictions thereof, oh, but they're really an alien person and they may be depicted as underage, but they're really 500 years old. You know, that's going to be something for the sociologists to work about. My argument is not about that. My argument has nothing to do with fandom culture and artistic styles and things like that. It has to do with actual depictions of child pornography using real life people. And I think that's a really good starting point as far as not getting into some kind of useless rabbit hole where we're trying to equate what's permissible to be viewed in public. Like, is this only for private? I haven't heard any really good examples other than the main examples being put forward are that depictions of minors and sexual content fulfills the needs of the pedosexual and should be decriminalized so that they don't act on certain impulses. And I haven't really heard any really positive support for that ethically. I mean, just even in a philosophical sense. So I don't, at this point, that's not something where I'd be like, well, I would need to see the literature and the studies about whether or not viewing this co-varies with less sexual violence in minors. That's okay. At that point, that's not an ethical way to approach policy study. And if you say why not, I'm not going to argue because you're defending pedophilia. I'm going to argue because putting minors at harm continually for the sake of research is not ethical in any modern, I mean, in any setting. Like there's, I'm not going to break out the textbooks about which medical codes that violates, but if you would like to argue that more research needs to be done on preventative health of people with a pathology by satiating their, yeah, see, there's really no way to get around it. Not just because it sounds gross, like because I understand the counter argument that was like you could say the same thing about gay people, like which is a really awful conflagration of the two, and that's not something that we would ever want to do, and that's not what this is about. But why is it different? Well, it's because what consenting adults do, or consenting minors, that's a thing too. Teenage sexuality is a healthy part of development, and that's not criminal either. Yeah, the things that we do criminalize are things that we've decided as a culture are not so good. So there's absolutely no way to argue against the law here. So the only argument would be is that the law is wrong. And in order to argue that the law is wrong, you would have to make an ethical and or legal, I don't know, distinction between who's being protected. And I don't see at any point the interests of that subsection of people with a pathology outweighs the protection of society and minors. Now what makes pedophilia pathological is the fact that it does direct harm. And that's there's only like 3 criteria that denotes what a pathology is, and it's persistence, and it's distress and harm, and it's pretty cut and dry. So I understand the argument from a future healthcare worker that pathologizing something that occurs that for whatever reason and may not be something that they control or their fault, and so they're coming forward with it and saying, hey, I'm not acting on these impulses. I'm trying to be proactive, and please don't arrest me before I did anything wrong. I and we are doing a very poor job at congratulating that level of courage to seek help before anything happens. Yeah, I think the what we would consider a flash in the pan conversation point, yeah, that didn't work out so well. Um, Pedosexuality is getting accepted under the umbrella. Uh, I don't think any psychologist or board of psychologists, or I don't think the APA is going to accept this and be like, yeah, this is not a pathology. They still consider cross-dressing a pathology um, for whatever reason, and yeah, we're gonna have a lot to work to do. Uh, Before we get a lot of scientists stroking their chins, being like, maybe they're right, and I don't necessarily see much hope for that. I do believe that people should probably seek proactive treatment, um, but a lot of the times I don't know the supporting markers for that are enwrapped in other things. So hopefully it just gets caught in other levels of treatment, and maybe the kind of focus on sexuality involving minors can be treated in a broader proactive sense than actually being like, quit being interested in kids, because that's not necessarily a starting or end point in treatment in general. That's more of a symptomatic of other things that are going on, and you'd have to go like 1 to 2 degrees lower to see where that came from in the first place. So I'm not saying I'm certainly saying that pedophilia is treatable, but that's typically not the thing that's being overtly treated, at least as far as any research I've read. And, just closing off, this just goes why that the concept of a paraphilia, which is sexualizing objects and characteristics, is so complicated, and in a modern standpoint needs to be erased because it doesn't do anything of use. All it does is complicate self-diagnosis. It gives bad faith clinicians things to poke at to normalize, I don't know, sort of conservative behavior. It's just not good. It's not good. I don't think paraphilia exists. I do understand that it exists as, I don't know, troublesome diagnostic criteria, but as its own thing, all it does is give excuses for people to make really bad faith arguments about, why is being transgender different than pedophilia, different than bestiality, different than a vor, different than stomping, different than blood play, different than scat play. There's a lot of different reasons why none of that has anything to do with each other, and yeah, some of those aren't even that ooky. Just get a garden hose and spray yourself off. Just stop stomping on animals and abusing children, and get consent before you let someone cut you. And hey, if you're into that, that's cool. We had a lot of kind of pro-vampire stuff in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. We all turned out okay. It's been 40 years since then. And you don't hear anyone complaining about the prevalence of blood play in the fucking 70s. So I really don't even give a shit. I have no idea why paraphilia is in there. It has nothing to do with paraphilia. Has nothing to do with pedophilia. That's its own thing that comes from a different definition of othering and abuse and cycles like that. So, yeah, could I find a better way to frame it? Am I smarter than the writers of the DSM? Am I smarter than the APA? I'm just newer. I don't think I'm smarter. I just think I'm newer. So, yeah. Hey, you're looking at someone that'll help write the next one. DSM 6. I'm going to have a voice in that, and so can you. Just go to school. Make your voice heard. Night.